I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. Order in the court. Welcome to Perino on Politics, where we give you everything you need to know from a 30,000-foot view of this week in politics. Join me back on the podcast today with a deeper dive into the political fallout of the criminal trials that, well, one just ended and one is just getting started. My friend, Republican strategist and co-founder of South and Hill Strategies, Colin Reed, back for more on the Perino on Politics podcast. Hi, Colin.
Hi, Dana. It's great to be back, although it'll be a tough act to follow coming after Harold Ford, so I'll do my best.
Yeah, Harold Ford Jr. is definitely like the nation's crowd favorite, I think, is what we are learning. I was at an event with Harold Ford Jr. not too long ago, and we were there was a photo line. People come get their picture taken and moving on. And I like to just move those things along pretty quickly, get people on their way. And he had a personal connection somehow, some way, with every single person that came through the line. And I said, yeah, he should be president. He's pretty great.
Yeah, it's almost like he was in Congress at one point or something like that.
Yeah. It was his race. Harold Ford Jr. ran for Senate in, what was it, 2006?
2006 in Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Yeah.
And was that race, it was fairly close, right?
I think it was, and that Tennessee's a red place, and he made it closer than others would have.
You should have. All right, so we're going to talk about politics. Let's get some trial stuff out of the way initially. We've had a few days to digest President Trump's conviction, guilty on all 34 counts. There are partisan takes, but there are also some real tangible things that the Trump team is seeing. You know, they're trying to make lemonade out of the lemons. And if you're looking at fundraising numbers and possible support, even from people who might say, can't stand the guy, but I'm going to vote for him now. How do you see Trump's conviction playing out?
Well, there's a lot of unknowns, to borrow the Secretary Rumsfeld's famous term. But let's start with what we do know. And what we do know is in the aftermath, the conviction served to unite the Republican Party in a way that it probably hasn't been as united since, I guess, the indictment when it came down from Alvin Bragg in the spring of last year. And these aren't just people who are out there defending him who are Donald Trump supporters. They're some of his fiercest critics. People like Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, Mitch McConnell are out there criticizing the outcome of the case. So when your party's united, that's always a good thing. But it is an election year. It doesn't feel like it at times. I know we're going to get to that in a little bit. But we do know the Democrat base remains deeply divided and deep unhappiness with their standard bearer, President Biden. So how this cookie will crumble with the middle, the truth is we don't really know. We know the Republicans are fired up. We know that the money is pouring in, $50 million for President Trump. Well,
now they're saying $200 million.
Yeah, that number just keeps going up and up.
$50 million was in the first 24 hours.
Yeah. So we don't really know. What we do know, I think, is this whole episode and incident served to give Donald Trump back something that he hasn't always had, but he did have in 2015 and 16 when he was so successful, and that is the agent of change. That is the idea that he is someone out there who is gonna make things different. And he's running against a guy in Joe Biden who is emblematic, who is symbolic of the status quo and how things are and have been for so many years. So it's allowed Donald Trump to be at his best in terms of politically. Now, look, he's going to deal with legal issues, and it's possible that independent voters find this thing a bridge too far. But we do know that every time that Trump has faced a situation that would end a mere mortal politician, he's come back stronger. So we'll see if history repeats itself here.
One of the things he did right afterwards, he did a couple of things that are pretty interesting. He went to the UFC fight on Saturday night, got a huge standing ovation. I noticed a camera shot from ESPN stayed on him for a full 2 minutes before it went over to the UFC channel, and just the energy in the room. And I thought, I imagine if you're a Trump supporter, you watch that and you think, how could Biden possibly compete with that? I mean, they had a campaign event 2 weeks ago in New Hampshire. As Jesse Waters pointed out, there were 36 people in the audience, and 14 of them were staffers.
Yeah, I heard some folks on the ground up in New Hampshire after that. It's just the campaign had just a very aura of listlessness and just kind of resignation that this thing isn't going well and they're cruising toward a defeat. And of course, they wouldn't say that. The campaign wouldn't. But The other split screen over the weekend was you got President Trump out there at a UFC event. Granted, those are his people, and if they're not voting for him now, they probably never will be. But they're certainly his crowd. But then you got President Biden on the split screen riding his bike around Rehoboth Beach. It was a nice weekend. It was a nice weekend for a bike ride. I wish I was out riding my bike by the beach. But he's got a big job he's running for right now, and you'd think at some point, with the calendar closing in on 5 months till Election Day, he'd have more important and bigger things to do. It just that was, to me, the thing that was so jarring about that whole screen. And it just seems as though the sitting president of the United States has just been an absent bystander in events, not just what's going on with Trump and the trial, but just everything. And it's just the incredibly shrinking presidency that he's trying to convince people that he's up for another 4 years. Meanwhile, he's barely doing the job that he's got now in his first term.
So, I mean, maybe the White House might say, well, he spent the weekend with family and especially with Hunter, because Hunter Biden's trial about falsifying a record when he got a gun, because he didn't say that he was an addict, that starts today, June 3rd. It's Monday, June 3rd, and that the president wanted to spend the weekend with him. And it was the 9th anniversary of Beau Biden's death last Thursday. And so you might be able to write those things off. But if they were seriously campaigning and competing, they would be crisscrossing the country: Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. His schedule is pretty light, but he is going overseas. So it is just strange. Part of me feels like, is Biden even campaigning right now? Plus, he's got debate prep before the end of the month.
Yeah. Look, it's like not doing media interviews for a long time. And when you don't do them, when you don't do a press conference, and then when you do finally go out there, the bar is much higher because the media holds you to a different set of standards. Whereas when you're out there every day, engaging, taking questions, you kind of get the benefit of the doubt from the referees or the umpires, which are in this case the media. Same deal with the travel schedule. You look at the Biden campaign, or I guess the President Biden's schedule, it's very light. And he could probably take a weekend off had he been charging across the country week in out, but he hasn't. So, look, these are the questions he has to face, and ultimately he's a status quo candidate in a change year. And I think of all the turmoil we've seen over the last few weeks and months with these trials, that's the challenge he's going to have to deal with. And right now he doesn't really seem to have an answer for it, other than the other guy is even less palatable than me. And if that's the shot they want to take, that they can shoot it. But I'm not so sure it's going to fly in this current climate and political environment.
Do you have any thoughts about the Hunter Biden trial that's getting started on Monday, June 3rd?
Yeah, those in glass houses should be careful about throwing stones. The Biden campaign has been so gleeful in their efforts to cast their opponent as a convicted felon. It would be ironic if Hunter Biden had that same label affixed to him by a jury of his peers in a few weeks. And even if he doesn't, I think there's going to be deep unease, or there should be deep unease amongst the Biden campaign, that it fuels these suspicions of a two-tiered system of justice, that a Department of Justice, which is run by one of President Biden's closest confidants and allies, did not make the case against Hunter Biden, whereas this blue DA in a blue city with a blue jury all of a sudden convicted a former president, and now we're talking about putting the guy behind bars, theoretically. So I would be very careful. And the thing about the Hunter Biden situation is President Biden has really never really been able to articulate or engage in a meaningful discussion about his son's conduct or behavior. It's clear it's very personal to him. Of course it is. It's his son. I think everyone kind of looks at that, but he's also not a 10-year-old. He's in his 50s, and it gets to the whole issue of beyond just the gun charges, which is what we're dealing with today. The heart of the matter is whether or not Hunter Biden was trading off his family name for undue influence and power, and that's something that the American people find very distasteful. It's the main issue that Hillary Clinton did not become president in 2016. And look, there was a time period where it looked like Joe Biden was never going to run for office again. And that was a time for the family to cash in, which if they're going to do it, that's great. But you shouldn't do it when your dad's going to run for president again in a few years and undergo all this scrutiny in a renewed light.
In an exchange this weekend that you and I had, you said that this issue involves a confluence of money, politics, and power, the same toxic cocktail that sunk Hillary in 2016.
Yeah, and that was what it was. And the 2016 campaign was, like the 2024 campaign, an election between two people who were widely known, who had very high unfavorable numbers, and one, Donald Trump, had unfavorable numbers less than Hillary Clinton, and that's why he was able to win. And now we're going down this same path again. The difference here now being is that Joe Biden has to carry all the baggage of an economy that people don't feel good about. 8 in 10 think the economy is heading in the wrong direction, and life just seems much more difficult. And that's what he is carrying into this election versus a guy in Donald Trump who people may know, they may not like, they may not find some of his personal behavior appropriate, but they're judging that on the merits of an entire canvas of two candidates. So but I think this idea that Joe Biden is either unable, unwilling, or incapable of campaigning is one that voters left, right, and center are going to have deep unease with.
So you're going to join the podcast the day after the presidential debate. So the presidential debate is set for June 27th. That's a Thursday. So we're going to do a special episode of Perino on Politics that will record Friday morning, June 28th. You know a lot about debate prep and what it takes. I mean, Colin, it's a lot for Biden to go up against Trump, even with all the different sort of ways that they've tried to help Biden have a good setup for the CNN debate. Like he doesn't have to walk out on stage. He'll already be seated. The microphones are going to be down while the other person is speaking. I'm okay with all those things. Oh, no audience, right? I'm okay with all of those things. But with President Biden having two big overseas commitments, the G7 meeting plus the D-Day recognitions and memorials, and then he's going to go to L.A. to do a big fundraiser with the Clinton team out there, when's he going to prep for the debate? And doesn't he need to really focus?
Yeah, these debates matter because they're one of the few times that you're out there without a safety net. You've got no infrastructure around you to bail you out if things go off the rails, and you're facing your opponent in such an unscripted, unfettered setting. And both of these guys have a lot of studying to do. They both have records to defend, but President Biden is the one where 86% of people think he's too old for the job, and this is going to be one of the few times they see him in a setting where they can evaluate that for themselves. So it's high stakes, it's high pressure. I know there was a feeling amongst certainly Democrats, but maybe some in the media as well, that President Biden got the better of President Trump in these debate negotiations. But we'll see, because there was a point in time where it didn't look like any debates might happen at all. I never thought that would happen, but now that they're out there, and you've got nothing, you got to stand on your own 2 feet, and it's going to be a huge metric that President Biden needs to clear in order to convince people that he's even worth considering for another 4 years in the job.
Last question in this segment, which is on the same question about debate prep. Do you think Trump is ready, or does he need to focus too?
Well, his first debate in 2020 wasn't great. A lot of these former presidents or current presidents' first debates aren't very good, and he's got to do his homework. He's got to learn the best hits on Biden and learn how to and to not get taken into these personal attacks. Look, he's at his best when he's talking about things other than himself. I know that sounds obvious, but at his press conference the other day, he was coming off 34 convictions. I get it, but it was all about him. When he's at his best is when he's taking those fears, those concerns, those complaints about what's happening to him and channeling them into the American people. And that's what he's going to do. He can do it. He has done it before, and it remains to be seen if he'll be able to do it again. But yeah, it's going to be, I want to say it's must-see TV, because these two guys, you never know what you're going to get. But I think there will be a lot more people tuning into a certain network in the end of June than they otherwise might.
Indeed. All right, we'll have much more Perino on Politics coming up. And we are back with Perino on Politics. Colin Reed is my guest. And Colin, I wanted to talk to you about a couple of policy things that are happening. Let's start with this. Apparently, Joe Biden on Tuesday, June 4th, is going to sign some executive orders that relate to the border, the southern border, and immigration. This after millions have been coming into the country since he first came on board as president, and he signed 91 executive orders trying to undo President Trump's policies. And this announcement by Biden is coming a day after a Venezuelan migrant who crossed illegally in Eagle Pass, Texas in 2023, made his way to New York. He's been involved in several robberies, and then he shot at 2 police officers. Both of those officers are going to live. But Joe Biden's going to invite a bunch of blue city mayors to the White House as he makes his announcement tomorrow. And if I were a blue city mayor, I'd be furious to be a prop for that.
It's a little bit different messaging than Republicans are responsible for the border being wide open because they didn't pass some bill that no one had ever heard of, which was what the Democrats were saying as recently as a couple of weeks ago. It's almost like, Dana, they might have seen a poll and realized that immigration had passed inflation as the number one issue and that people were blaming the president in an election year. So I think a lot of people are going to see this for what it is, which is an election year conversion, way too little, way too late. And again, this gets back to the broader point of, were we talking about these issues at this level, at this volume, at this magnitude 4 years ago? We weren't. There's a lot. Immigration's a complicated topic, and there's a lot of blame, and there's no easy solution to it. But it's at this point, it's become an inescapable truth that the illegal immigration crisis in this country happened on Joe Biden's watch. It's gotten worse on Joe Biden's watch, and now he's going to ask the American public for another 4 years in office. And anytime you start to do these executive orders in June of an election year, they've got the sneaky stench of partisan politics on it, and I think that's what most people will see it. And the fact that it's surrounded by a bunch of Democrats is going to only exacerbate that. There's been just zero outreach to Republicans on this issue, and that's one of the reasons it's been such a political hot potato.
Then last Friday, out of the blue, as the verdict in Trump's trial was being digested by everybody, Joe Biden comes out and says, okay, here's, I've got basically a must-take-it deal that Israel is going to have to take with Hamas. At the same time, in the same 48-hour period, he said that Ukraine, okay, yeah, now, even though you've been asking for 2.5 years, now I guess I will let you use the weapons for what you say you need it for, which is to reach inside of Russia. And I'm just like, I'm trying to be kind and even handed and thoughtful, but I am thinking, what are they doing?
Well, there were a lot of memes flying around last week on Thursday, and it's kind of in the PR profession, if you've got bad news to make it and someone else there's a news event of the magnitude of what was happening in the New York courthouse, great time to dump your news. People like to dump their bad news on a summer Friday, generally, let alone a summer Friday when the former president has just been convicted, and it's something that's never happened before. So anything that happened, my point is, anything that happened on that day, whether it was proactively announced, was intentionally designed not to get attention. And that's the only way you can see what those two events that you just talked about happening. Otherwise, why would he not have waited to a fresh week? Look, one of the untold things in this election cycle is just how badly Joe Biden is doing with younger voters. And it's he and Trump are almost running at parity in some of these polls. And that's insane. Joe Biden won young voters by 20 points in 2020. And for him to have slipped that far, that much, and look, I don't think what's happening in Israel is the only issue that's driving that, but I think it's a big one. And I think there's huge swaths of the Democratic Party base who are anti-Israel and are demanding President Biden accede to these outrageous demands they have. And to his credit, he hasn't gone all there, but you never know when he's going to get pushed. So look, his base is deeply fractured. Young voters are a big reason of it, and it might be just why he wasn't so eager to talk about anything to do with what's going on with Israel and Hamas in a way that's further going to inflame his left-wing base.
And as a last topic for this segment, number 2, I want to ask you about the inflation that the nation is experiencing, because even though you'll have a lot of media and the White House and the Democratic campaign will say, look, the economy's better, even though we only had 1% growth last year. But they're saying last quarter, 1% growth last quarter. They'll say that wages haven't quite kept up, but they're getting a little better. But to this, right now, people are paying every single day 20% more for the goods that they were buying every day under Trump as well. And they notice that. And I know that you have people like David Axelrod or David Plouffe, the Obama advisor, is trying to urge the White House to be more empathetic. And it just seems like it's really hard for them to do that and to get their heads around the fact that people are really mad about high prices.
Yeah, don't. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? And that's kind of been the economic message from the White House from the beginning. It started by wrapping the entire debate around Bidenomics, which of course means that the president is going to own the economic debate since he literally put his name on it. And it's not as though people's perceptions have gotten any better. Consumer sentiment recently went to a 6-month low. Only 22% of people think the national economy is in good shape. Inflation is up since Biden took office. Forget all these month over month, year over year. Inflation is up 21% since the day Joe Biden took office. That's a huge chunk of change. And that's why when voters out there, they're evaluating the entire landscape of events, and that's the one that hits them in the face no matter what they do, whether you go to the grocery store, whether you get on a plane, whether you're filling up your gas tank, it's all right there. And those are the anchors, those are the anvils that around Joe Biden as he tries to swim to another term, and they're real. And to have yet to come up with a compelling economic message 5 months before an election year, it's not good, and it's they haven't even begun to really. The only thing we do know about what a second Biden administration term is he's going to raise taxes by letting the Trump tax cuts expire. So that's kind of the one thing we do know, which is we've got huge sweeping tax increases waiting for us if he wins. So it's a double whammy.
And I just want to leave this segment by having you remind everybody that yes, it is possible that Joe Biden could win re-election. I know some people might think that's impossible to imagine, but it's a real possibility.
It sure is. I mean, for Donald Trump to have won in 2016, he pulled an inside straight, and he won states in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania that are really hard for any Republican to win. And he's going to have to take 2 of those 3 at least to be able to regain the presidency, regardless of what happens with some of these other states that people are looking at, whether it's a Georgia, or North Carolina, Arizona, or Nevada. So the Joe Biden's got the home field advantage in terms of playing on these blue states. Now, the flip side to that is Donald Trump is winning this campaign right now by any sort of demonstrable polling statistic. And he just got convicted of 34 felonies. So if Joe Biden can't pull ahead of him now, when can he? So that's the one thing that's going in Trump's favor is like you have to assume this is probably the low point for his campaign. And even then, he's still ahead. But yeah, the math is always tricky for these Republicans in these maps. And look, it'll come down to 45, 50, 60,000 votes, combined votes across 3 states that will determine the next occupant of the White House.
Colin Reed, stay right there. We'll be right back. And we are back with Perino on Politics. Colin, I want to ask you the question that we ask every time, and you always come up with something different that I have to keep on my radar, which is, what are you watching? What are you paying attention to that I might be missing?
For all the talk of the Biden administration accusing the Trump administration of doing anything to hold on to power, some of the things they are doing, the Biden administration are doing right now in this election year, it's pretty outrageous. And if you look at what's happening with gas prices, the Biden administration has been very, very vocal about their goal to release from our Strategic Petroleum Reserve, it's called. We have this Strategic Petroleum Reserve of oil that is meant to be used for an emergency until the Biden administration has been used for a political emergency. And when their poll numbers get really bad because gas prices get really high, they release some of these reserves, which are meant, by the way, for global instability. They are meant for hurricanes that come through and knock out the normal way of doing business. And the Biden campaign has shamelessly used our backup strategic oil reserves to artificially keep gas prices low. So that's bad on a number of levels. Number one, what happens if we actually need these reserves? They're 40% lower now than where we were when Biden took office. But it also kind of gets to the broader point, which is what else are they doing or willing to do? What are some of these agency heads, some of these bureaucrats, some of these people, Dana, Percy has a higher name identification than a lot of these bureaucrats in the Biden administration, but they are very powerful in terms of their ability to pull the levers of government. And what else are they going to do if the election gets closer and the poll numbers don't tighten up?
Right. Well, I thought it was pretty interesting. You had the Wall Street Journal editorial say that the FTC is like, we're going to lock up these CEOs of the oil companies.
Yeah, and that's a really complicated issue. The whole thing of it is every time there's a dispute in this arena, the Biden administration, time after time after time, treats American oil and gas producers as the villain du jour over anybody else. And they always look outward for solutions to our energy needs. Biden goes to Saudi Arabia. Biden looks the other way when Russia starts violating its oil sanctions. Biden cuts deals with Venezuela for them to release more of their oil. But he never, ever, ever is able to look inward and say, number one, thank the American oil and gas producers for what they do. They're always the villain, not the solution, and it's contributed to our energy woes. And that's one thing we do know that will continue in a second term, because it's the extreme green left controls so much of the apparatus of today's modern Democratic Party, and certainly the administration of Joe Biden.
But do you think that has hurt him? Hurt the Biden team just in terms of the policy has led to the higher prices and constraints, or is it also one of the things that is hurting him with young people? Because if you look at some of the polls, they say he hasn't done enough on climate change.
Which is really something else, right? Given everything he has done. So look, you give them out as a cookie, they're going to want a glass of milk. That group of voters will never be satisfied they never will be satisfied, because even if you gave them everything they wanted, they'd still find another demand they'd make. And that's the thing the administration's learning the hard way. I think it's certainly hurt us, hurt our global standing and our ability to compete in the world. And it hasn't really got him any political goodwill, because it's made prices higher, which are a headache for everybody. But he hasn't gone far enough to totally cave. So yeah, it's been a lose-lose. But look, these are the bad policies have bad political outcomes, and this is one of them. But I don't ever see it slowing down, and even if everyone in the world is driving an electric car.
Right. My last question for you: how do you see the House and the Senate right now? Do you think that the Republicans still have a good chance to take the Senate, and the House is a question now?
I think we're likely to see. Well, the House to me will trend. The House control of the House will surf with the control of the White House. So whoever wins the White House will likely take the House with them. The Senate is an interesting one. It should be one that should go Republican no matter what, given the makeup of the states and the quality of the candidates there. And that's one where if Donald Trump is able to somehow survive all this and get a House majority, it's possible he gets a Senate majority as well and has complete control of the levers of government come January.
Do you think that there might be more ticket splitters this year, meaning you vote for a Democrat up top, Republicans down, or vice versa, vote for Trump, but your Senate Democratic guy you want to hold on to?
Ticket splitters have been going the way of the dodo bird of late. They've just been a vanishing breed. And, look, our country's gotten more polarized. It's gotten more divided. Everyone's tribal. So it's hard to see them coming back at the congressional level. You do see it with some of these governors who are able to kind of stay above the political fray, whether it's, in New England or Larry Hogan in Maryland. These are guys who were able to survive the Trump years despite him being not popular at all in his state. But look, the congressional map will largely break down along pure party lines, and that's one of the reasons you haven't seen people like Sherrod Brown in Ohio or John Tester out in Montana. Those are two of the most endangered Democratic incumbents. You haven't seen them say barely anything on the Trump indictment or the Trump convictions, because it's just not popular in their states, and it's an interesting reality they're going to have to deal with.
So interesting. As always, Colin, I've got your question for you. This is the quick multiple choice trivia question. On November 3rd, 1948, which newspaper mistakenly published the headline, "Dewey defeats Truman"? Was it the Chicago Daily Tribune, the Washington Post, or the New York Times?
I'm going to go with A, the Chicago Daily Tribune.
That's correct. President Truman famously posed with a copy of the newspaper at the St. Louis Union Station and reportedly said, "That ain't the way I heard it," which is pretty funny. A lot of problems over at the Washington Post, by the way. Did you see that?
I did. I guess that Chicago Daily Tribune might have been the best and first known example of fake news.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, I don't know. We could probably have a good long... You could do a whole podcast about fake news over the centuries, actually, and all the way that it goes back. If I'm thinking back, history of journalism class goes all the way back to Dracula, I believe. Colin, thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.